We have more now on that bombshell new reporting from MSNBC's Carol Leonnig and Ken Delanian. But the Trump Justice Department shut down an investigation into White House border czar Tom Homan. Last year, in an undercover operation, the FBI recorded Homan accepting $50,000 in cash after indicating he could help agents who were posing as business executives win government contracts in the second Trump administration. At the time, Homan was the owner of a private consulting business and was not a public official. Two sources told MSNBC that in recent weeks, Trump appointees officially closed the investigation after FBI Director Kash Patel requested a status update on the case. When asked for comment about MSNBC's reporting, the White House, the Justice Department, and the FBI dismissed the investigation as politically motivated and baseless. Tom Homan did not respond to MSNBC's request for comment.
Okay, so what's happening right now inside the Department of Justice is absolutely explosive, and I need you to understand how devastating this scandal is for President Trump and for everyone in his administration who thought they could weaponize federal law enforcement against political enemies without consequences. A swirl of explosive allegations and internal investigations have shaken the DOJ to its core after it emerged that Trump's top administration officials, including his own special pardon attorney, are being investigated for interfering with, politicizing, and possibly compromising major criminal cases against Trump's rivals and critics. This isn't just political controversy or partisan finger-pointing. This is the FBI and the Justice Department itself investigating whether Trump's appointees committed serious crimes while trying to use federal law enforcement as a weapon of political retribution. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Joining us now, Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, who serves as ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Good to finally have you on.
I'm delighted to be with you guys.
Can you give us your response to this bombshell reporting from Carol and Ken?
Well, this is astonishing. I mean, everybody needs to know that the FBI was actually involved in a different investigation in Texas when one of the subjects there was apparently overheard talking about Tom Homan taking money in return for a promise to give people contracts when the new administration began. So then they added an investigative component to look into Tom Homan, and they sent in FBI agents, as I understand it, undercover with $50,000.
Leaked reports and whistleblower testimony are painting a devastating picture of what's been happening inside the Trump DOJ. Officials are accused of sharing sensitive grand jury information with unauthorized persons, a serious federal crime that undermines the integrity of the entire criminal justice system. They're accused of ordering targeted political reprisals against Trump's enemies, including investigations designed to damage or destroy people who cross the president rather than to pursue legitimate law enforcement objectives. They're accused of violating long-established protocols specifically to protect Trump's interests and punish his critics in ways that corrupt the fundamental mission of the Justice Department. The specific targets of this political weaponization include some of the most prominent figures who have opposed or investigated Trump over the years. Senator Adam Schiff, who led the first impeachment inquiry against Trump and has been one of his most vocal critics, is reportedly among those whose cases may have been manipulated for political purposes. New York Attorney General Letitia James, who brought the civil fraud case that resulted in massive judgments against Trump, is another target of what investigators are calling an unprecedented campaign of political retribution using the full power of federal law enforcement. Can you believe this? The DOJ and FBI are now investigating whether Trump's own appointees committed crimes while trying to prosecute Trump's enemies. The investigators are being investigated. The prosecutors are potentially becoming defendants. The entire apparatus Trump set up to go after his critics may now become the evidence used to bring down his own administration officials in criminal proceedings. This is the kind of self-inflicted wound that happens when you weaponize law enforcement for political purposes. Eventually, the corruption becomes too blatant to ignore, and the system turns against the very people who tried to corrupt it. The implications for the cases Trump's DOJ has been pursuing are potentially catastrophic and could result in complete collapse of prosecutions that were supposed to demonstrate Trump's power over his enemies. Officials are admitting that these actions may have compromised the investigations and jeopardized the viability of the cases if they proceed to trial. That means convictions against Trump's critics could be overturned on appeal if they're obtained through tainted processes. Cases that haven't gone to trial yet might be dismissed entirely if judges conclude that prosecutorial misconduct makes fair proceedings impossible. The very prosecutions Trump wanted to use to destroy his enemies could collapse because his people were too corrupt and too obvious in their political manipulation. Former DOJ lawyers are blowing the whistle on what they describe as a culture of unprecedented corruption inside the Trump Justice Department. They're describing blanket pardons for Capitol rioters that bypass normal review processes. They're revealing chilling orders to launch investigations targeting Trump's enemies without legitimate law enforcement justification. They're exposing efforts to cancel federal contracts with law firms that have Democratic ties as punishment for political associations rather than any legitimate business reason. The picture emerging from these whistleblowers is of a Justice Department that has been transformed from a law enforcement agency into what insiders are calling a vehicle of retribution for Trump's personal and political vendettas. New grand jury subpoenas are now seeking communications between Trump's political fixers and outside parties at the heart of these controversies. That means investigators are following the trail of evidence to see who knew what, who gave orders, and how high up the chain of command the corruption extends. When grand juries start issuing subpoenas in corruption investigations involving administration officials, it means prosecutors believe there's evidence of criminal conduct worth pursuing through the formal investigative process. This isn't just congressional oversight or media criticism. This is the criminal justice system gearing up to potentially prosecute the people who tried to weaponize it. So we're going to break down exactly what these investigations have uncovered, which officials are in legal jeopardy, how this could affect the cases Trump's DOJ has been pursuing against his enemies, and what this scandal means for the integrity of American law enforcement and the political landscape heading into 2026. This is Watergate-level territory, a president's administration potentially brought down by the corruption they thought would protect them. All right, let's dig into the details of this DOJ scandal, because understanding exactly what's being investigated and who's in legal jeopardy reveals the full scope of this crisis and why it threatens to bring down not just individual officials, but potentially the entire apparatus Trump has been using to pursue his enemies. We need to start with what the investigations have actually uncovered and why career prosecutors and FBI agents apparently concluded that crimes may have been committed by their own leadership. The core allegation is that Trump's appointees at the highest levels of the Justice Department shared grand jury information with unauthorized persons. Grand jury proceedings are secret for very important reasons. They protect the integrity of investigations, prevent witnesses from being intimidated, and ensure that people aren't publicly accused of crimes before prosecutors have determined charges are warranted. Sharing grand jury secrets is a federal crime, and it's treated seriously precisely because it undermines the entire foundation of how criminal investigations are supposed to work in the American system. The allegation that Trump's pardon attorney and other top appointees leaked grand jury information suggests they were trying to give Trump or his allies advance warning about investigations, help coordinate political responses to legal developments, or otherwise use secret investigative information for political purposes rather than legitimate law enforcement. This kind of conduct corrupts the criminal justice process at its core and provides grounds for dismissing cases, overturning convictions, and prosecuting the officials who leaked the information. The attempts to sway convictions of political adversaries represent another category of potentially criminal conduct that investigators are examining closely. The cases specifically mentioned include prosecutions or investigations targeting Senator Adam Schiff, who has been a prominent Trump critic since his role leading the first impeachment inquiry, and New York Attorney General Letitia James, who successfully sued Trump for civil fraud and obtained judgments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If DOJ officials manipulated these cases for political purposes rather than legitimate law enforcement objectives, that constitutes abuse of power and potentially obstruction of justice, depending on the specific conduct involved. The concern that these actions may have compromised the investigations and jeopardize the viability of the cases is particularly significant because it means even cases Trump wanted to win might now be lost due to the misconduct of his own appointees. Defense attorneys in any prosecution can argue that their clients cannot receive fair trials if the prosecution was motivated by political animus rather than legitimate law enforcement concerns. Judges can dismiss cases or overturn convictions if they conclude that prosecutorial misconduct tainted the proceedings beyond repair. The very aggressiveness Trump demanded in pursuing his enemies may have doomed those prosecutions by making the political motivation too obvious to deny. The whistleblower testimony describing unprecedented corruption inside the Trump DOJ provides the human evidence that corroborates documentary and communications evidence investigators are gathering. These are career Justice Department employees who have seen administrations come and go and who understand normal operations well enough to recognize when something extraordinary and improper is happening. When they describe what they witnessed as unprecedented, that characterization carries weight because these are people with decades of experience who can compare current practices to historical norms. The specific examples whistleblowers have cited include blanket pardons for Capitol rioters that bypassed normal review processes designed to ensure pardons are granted appropriately. The pardon power is absolute, but the process for exercising it typically involves careful review to ensure the president has complete information before making decisions. Bypassing that process suggests political urgency overrode normal deliberation, raising questions about whether the pardons were part of a political strategy rather than individualized justice decisions. Whistleblowers also describe orders to launch investigations targeting Trump's enemies without legitimate law enforcement justification. Investigations are supposed to be opened when there's credible evidence of criminal conduct worth pursuing, not when the president wants to damage someone politically. If DOJ officials ordered investigations for political purposes, that represents a fundamental corruption of the investigative process that could expose them to criminal liability and provide grounds for challenging any charges that resulted from those tainted investigations. The efforts to cancel federal contracts with law firms having Democratic ties represents yet another category of alleged misconduct, using government contracting power for political punishment rather than legitimate procurement purposes. Federal contracts are supposed to be awarded based on merit, capability, and value, not based on the political affiliations of firm partners or employees. Using contracting decisions to punish political opponents violates procurement laws and represents exactly the kind of abuse of power that undermines public trust in government. The description of DOJ as a vehicle of retribution targeting political enemies captures the fundamental transformation that whistleblowers and investigators say has occurred under Trump's appointees. The Justice Department is supposed to enforce the law impartially, pursuing cases based on evidence and legal merit rather than political considerations. When it becomes a tool for pursuing personal and political vendettas, it loses legitimacy and public trust in ways that damage the entire legal system. The phrase vehicle of retribution suggests officials understood they were perverting the department's mission, but proceeded anyway because political loyalty to Trump mattered more than institutional integrity. The grand jury subpoenas seeking communications between Trump's political fixers and outside parties at the heart of these controversies indicate that investigators are trying to establish the full scope of coordination between political operatives and DOJ officials. If communications show that political operatives were directing or influencing prosecutorial decisions, that would demonstrate the politicization was intentional and coordinated rather than the result of individual bad judgment by particular officials. Such evidence would strengthen criminal cases against the officials involved and potentially extend liability to the political operatives who directed their conduct. The parallels to Watergate that observers are drawing reflect the seriousness of using law enforcement for political purposes and the historical precedent for how such scandals can bring down administrations. Nixon's downfall began with political operatives conducting illegal activities and escalated when the cover-up involved obstruction of justice by administration officials. Trump's DOJ scandal involves similar elements: political motivation for law enforcement activities, potential obstruction through sharing of secret information, and cover-up efforts that may themselves constitute crimes. The connection to public faith in law enforcement matters enormously because the Justice Department depends on public trust to function effectively. When people believe prosecutions are motivated by politics rather than legitimate law enforcement, they resist cooperating with investigations, view convictions as illegitimate, and lose confidence in the entire criminal justice system. The damage from politicizing DOJ extends far beyond individual cases to affect how Americans view their government and whether they believe in equal justice under law. Okay, let's break this down into clear points so everyone understands exactly what's happening with this DOJ scandal and why it represents such a serious threat to Trump's administration and to the integrity of American law enforcement. Point number one, the investigation into Trump's appointees for sharing grand jury secrets represents potentially criminal conduct that could result in prosecutions of the very officials who were supposed to be prosecuting Trump's enemies on his behalf. Grand jury secrecy exists for crucial reasons, and violating it is a federal crime regardless of who does it or why. If Trump's pardon attorney and other top appointees shared secret grand jury information with unauthorized persons, they committed crimes that exposed them to prosecution and imprisonment. The irony of prosecutors being prosecuted for crimes they committed while trying to prosecute Trump's critics is almost too perfect. The weapon Trump tried to use against his enemies is now being turned against his own people. Point number two, the alleged efforts to sway convictions of political adversaries like Senator Schiff and Attorney General James could result in those cases collapsing entirely, denying Trump the political victories he sought through these prosecutions. Officials are admitting these actions may have compromised the investigations and jeopardized the viability of the cases. Defense attorneys will use evidence of political motivation to challenge any convictions obtained through tainted processes. Judges may dismiss cases outright if they conclude fair trials are impossible, given the prosecutorial misconduct that's been exposed. The prosecutions Trump wanted most may fail precisely because his people were too aggressive and too obvious in their political manipulation of the justice system. Point number three, the whistleblower testimony describing unprecedented corruption provides human corroboration for documentary evidence and establishes that career professionals recognize what was happening as extraordinary and improper compared to historical norms. These are experienced DOJ employees who have served under multiple administrations and understand what normal operations look like. When they describe current practices as unprecedented corruption, that characterization carries significant weight because they have the context to compare current conduct to historical baselines. Their willingness to come forward despite career risks demonstrates the seriousness of what they witnessed and their belief that silence would make them complicit in ongoing misconduct. Point number four, the specific examples of misconduct, including blanket pardons for Capitol rioters, politically motivated investigations, and contract cancellations targeting Democratic-affiliated law firms, demonstrate a systematic pattern rather than isolated incidents. This isn't one official making one bad decision. It's a comprehensive transformation of DOJ into a political weapon across multiple dimensions of department operations, pardons, investigations, contracting decisions. All were allegedly corrupted for political purposes in ways that suggest coordination and direction from senior leadership rather than individual initiative by particular officials acting alone. Point number five, the grand jury subpoenas seeking communications between political operatives and DOJ officials suggest investigators are building cases that could extend liability beyond the department to political figures who directed the misconduct from outside. If communications show political operatives giving orders to DOJ officials about prosecutorial decisions, that demonstrates intentional coordination to corrupt law enforcement for political purposes. Such evidence would strengthen criminal cases against everyone involved in the conspiracy and potentially reach into Trump's inner circle of political advisors who may have been directing the weaponization of DOJ from outside the department. Point number six, the damage to public trust in law enforcement extends far beyond these specific cases to affect how Americans view their entire justice system and whether they believe equal justice under law is still possible. When the Justice Department is revealed to be operating as a vehicle of retribution for political vendettas, people lose faith in prosecutions generally and become skeptical about whether any federal case is legitimate or politically motivated. This erosion of trust damages law enforcement effectiveness for years beyond any particular administration and undermines the social contract that depends on belief in impartial justice. So where does this leave us after these devastating revelations about corruption inside Trump's Justice Department? Top Trump appointees, including the special pardon attorney, are under investigation for potentially criminal conduct, including sharing grand jury secrets and manipulating prosecutions for political purposes. Cases against Trump's enemies like Senator Schiff and Attorney General James may collapse because prosecutorial misconduct has compromised the investigations and jeopardized their viability. Whistleblowers are describing unprecedented corruption, including blanket pardons, politically motivated investigations, and contract cancellations targeting Democratic-affiliated law firms. Grand jury subpoenas are seeking communications between political operatives and DOJ officials that could extend liability beyond the department to Trump's political inner circle. And public trust in law enforcement is being damaged in ways that will affect American justice for years beyond this particular administration. This is what happens when you try to weaponize law enforcement for political purposes. Eventually, the corruption becomes too blatant to hide. Investigators within the system start building cases against the corruptors, and the weapon you created gets turned against your own people. Trump thought he could use DOJ to destroy his enemies while protecting his friends. Instead, his appointees may have committed crimes that will destroy them while the cases against his enemies collapse due to the misconduct that was supposed to guarantee their convictions. The political implications heading into 2026 are enormous because this scandal validates every criticism Democrats have made about Trump weaponizing DOJ while demonstrating that Republicans can't trust their own Justice Department leadership to pursue cases competently without creating legal landmines that blow up in their faces. Neither party emerges from this looking good. Democrats look like victims of political persecution, while Republicans look like corrupt bunglers who couldn't even execute their political vendettas without getting caught and investigated by their own department. Keep watching this scandal closely because the investigations are ongoing and the evidence being gathered through grand jury subpoenas could lead to indictments of senior administration officials who thought they were above the law. The DOJ that was supposed to bring down Trump's enemies may instead bring down Trump's own people in a spectacular demonstration of how corruption eventually consumes those who practice it. Are you kidding me? The Justice Department investigating its own leadership for crimes committed while trying to prosecute the president's political enemies is one of the most extraordinary scandals in modern American history.